Welcome, everybody. My name is Cormac Collier. I'm the Executive Director for the Nantucket Land Council. Thrilled that you are all here and that we are putting on the second annual State of the Harbor Forum. Before we begin, I just want to take a quick little moment. Did everybody read the paper today? Anyone? For those of you that didn't, the Land Council, the Nantucket Civic League, and the Camp Richards Campers Association were finally victorious in its 5-year battle to protect Camp Richards and to retain local ownership and control. Yes. This has been a long time coming, and if I could high-five every one of you, I would do it. So let's get back to the matter of the day. For those of you that don't know the Land Council, I believe most of you do, but let me just give a brief summary of what we are. We're an environmental group on the island. We've been around since 1974. Primarily, our work is split into 4 different areas. One is land protection. We work with the Foundation and the Land Bank to do various land protection projects through conservation easements. Popular ones that we've done are Linda Loring's property at Eel Point Road and portions of Bartlett Farm as well. Second, we do a lot of education in the schools and with the community at large. Third, we do a lot of advocacy work as it relates to letting the community know about different environmental issues, and then also working with our regulatory authorities and governmental bodies to really promote sound environmental policy throughout the community and throughout all levels of regulatory government. Finally, we also have a research component. We're going to be talking about a lot about that tonight as well. So today's format for the day, we're changing it up a little bit from last year. And we do have a great keynote speaker. David Gray is the head of the sewer department, who's going to be talking about giving a presentation on the sewer main break that happened this past winter, and then the various steps that the town is taking as a whole to improve our sewer system as it relates to the harbor. And then also we have a panel of experts who are going to be discussing anything and everything that you want to talk about. So we're going to have a question and answer session with a number of people. So we're really encouraging a lot of questions and discussing. So just before I begin, or David begins, that's what we're talking about today, Nantucket Harbor. That is the Nantucket Harbor Watershed, delineated in yellow. Essentially, the watershed is everything that is up gradient of the harbor ecosystem, all activities on that land, fertilizer use, landscaping use, runoff from impervious surfaces, houses, you name it, it all affects somehow that down gradient water body of Nantucket Harbor. And what we're here to talk about today is really, one, identifying sort of the health of the ecology, current state of the harbor itself, and then again, identifying all the initiatives that the town and the nonprofit community is taking to improve the health of the harbor, investigate the health of the harbor, and bring it back to a balanced ecosystem. So with that, I'd like to introduce David Gray, who is our main speaker, and again, the head of the sewer department, who will talk a little bit about our sewer system on the island. Great. Thanks, David.
Oh, hello, everybody. I don't know if you can. It's working. Hello, everyone. All righty. I know many people in the room. I don't know everyone, but thank you for coming tonight. And we're going to talk about my favorite topic of all times, sewer. I do tend to get a little winded, so if I get going too much, I'm sure I'll get the signal from Cormac to keep on moving. My life drastically changed on January 4th, the night of the sewer force main break down on the South Beach Street. At approximately 8:15 on that Thursday night, we were informed of a problem downtown by the police department. They were checking an alarm, and they called right away and said that we needed to respond. And when I got there at about 8:15, 8:17, we had a flow coming out of the ground about 3 feet right by Walters. So that started the the transition in my life right then and there. The next morning at 8 o'clock, we had a big meeting, a conference call with the town administration work group and Mass DEP to inform them what had happened. The night before, at about 9:15, between 9:15 and 9:45, I made all the notifications that I have to make as required by law. I have to notify DEP, Mass EPA, Board of Health, Natural Resources, and any other department that went from there. Luckily, Roberto from the Board of Health and a couple others took on some of the other notifications that needed to be made as I was on scene down at the site of the break. This was quite an event that happened. And let me see if I can get this to go forward. The morning after is what I'm calling it. That night, we happened to be on call. My whole staff was on duty due to the pending storm that was ongoing. So we had staff at the plants. We had the C Street pump station was actually manned by the on-site resident engineer, and we had other roaming teams around. So once we got the notification, we were on scene within 10 minutes, and we were able to secure the pumping at C Street by about 8:30. So we were able to secure the flow about 8:30 that night. Then it started the investigation to find out what had happened or what we were looking at. This map here kind of shows the area that was affected. You can see some of the outfalls that were cause for concern. The Children's Beach Pump Station discharge. So what we had cause for concern was there's a discharge here at the in the harbor at the Nantucket Yacht Club. There's another one at the other side of the yacht club, and we had two over here down on Easy Street that were the major concerns, because once we secured the pumps at C Street, we had overflow coming out of the manholes in 4 or 5 different locations on Easy Street, South Beach Street, down at Broad Street, and by Walters. And it was coming directly out of the manholes and directly into the storm drain system, which discharged into the harbor. We tried to secure as much as we could at the time with sandbags and everything else. With that kind of a flow, we didn't have much luck. So what we ended up doing is the following morning, we had a discussion with Mass DEP to creatively come up with a source to take and pump the sewage from one manhole at one location that we knew where it was and we could test and discharge it to one single location. And that was done by a screener, which you'll see here, that my crew and with help from Miles Reese's crew rapidly designed and built on scene. And then we started pumping. We activated the pump at about 6:20 on Saturday, January 6th, and that what that did, and it took the 5 potential discharge areas along the harbor to containing it to just one single point that we could control, we could test, and we could screen all the screenings that if anyone has ever seen any other presentations that I've done, we removed 2,500 pounds of wipes, rags, anything else that gets flushed. Flushable wipes are sewer operators' worst enemy. They all say flushable on them. They certainly flush, but they stop at the pump or at the screeners at the plant. And you'll see that in just a second as we get going along some. The area here in yellow, I made the decision first thing in the morning on Saturday morning and called Toscana and any other contractor so I could get cement barricades. And I went a little overboard on blocking off roads. What I didn't want was cross-contamination. We had a lot of spectators in the area that were walking down through South Beach and everywhere else, and they weren't just walking in stormwater. They were walking in some sewage, and they were walking all across town. So we took in, I made the decision to just seal off the area completely with cement barricades. It was concerning because it was the only way in and out of town for the truck route. So we had to take and reverse all the traffic on South Water Street with help from the police department. There was quite a bunch of logistical stuff that we had to do. But my biggest concern was cross-contamination of all the areas and people walking through. Again, this describes the 5 discharge points that I was concerned with. Ultimately, the second discharge area on Easy Street, during the investigation part of it, the initial investigation part, we found another major incident that was going on. We found a significant oil spill that was coming from an upstream source, not part of the basin area for the Easy Street, but it was coming from another storm drain system that actually connected all of India Street and all up and through that whole North Liberty Street area. So then we had to get Mass DEP down here for that as well. And we ended up finding down in right behind the Dreamland Theater, the old AC building. There was an older building in there that actually had a 275-gallon oil tank in the crawl space with a hole in it that had some oil in it. We don't know exactly how much product we lost, but during our investigation to find out what happened with the sewer, we discovered this other issue. That today still actually has some active booms on Easy Street, unless they've recently been removed, but I think they're still in place. And that spill itself belongs to Mass DEP. That's nothing to do with the town. We're still trying to contain what little bit of residue is still within, and every time it rains, we get a little spike. So that's what the booms are, still down on Easy Street. I got a couple of pictures just coming through. The night that I responded, this is where the sewage was coming out of the ground, about 3 feet. It was flowing about 2,000 gallons a minute. That's what the pumps had for capacity down at the plant, at the pump station. And you can see right at the bottom is storm drain. So it was coming right out of the ground and right down into the storm drain system, into the harbor. Again, this was another spot that we thought we had a second break. This is directly in front of the Yacht Club building. Let me go back here. The second break we thought we had was right in this general area here, because that's where the sewage was showing itself coming out of the ground. What we come to find out afterwards is, I'll get along here a little bit more. I can explain why we had sewage presenting itself in a couple of locations. This is just a couple of shots that shows the amount of ice and the vehicles. A good portion of this ice and stuff that everybody sees here, this is not sewage. This was strictly stormwater. Just because of the fact that there could have been some cross-contamination, we blocked everything off. Any of the active sewage flow that there was never left the roadway, except for the Yacht Club parking lot, which that night was actually floating. The asphalt pavement in the whole area was actually floating because of the flow coming from the pumps at the pump station. This was the actual site of the force main break. This is right near Cook's Bicycle Shop. Their driveway is right up here. So this is right at the Cook's Bike Shop. This is the location that we installed the screener. The reason I wanted to install it there, people wanted to know why I didn't install it closer or at a shorter distance from where all of the town's stormwater discharge from the Children's Beach Pump Station discharges right here. And we had the screener right next to it. So everything was discharging in one location. So we had complete control of where the location was and we could test it. And we had to do testing every day for weeks just to take in testing for any contaminants and nitrogen levels and everything like that. This just shows the system going together, the piping system, and then we actually converted a 30-yard dumpster into a screener, which looks like that. And then this is actually showing the screener running. And just below that, right here is where the discharge for all the stormwater discharges through a pump system at Children's Beach. So there was one single point of all discharge for all of this the sewage and for the stormwater. And as you can see, we retained 2,500 pounds of wipes in the 2.5 days that the screener was running. This is what some of the material looks like. We had to go down and actually clean it twice while it was running, and dispose of it properly at the plant, and then ultimately take it out to the landfill. This map kind of shows a little bit now, once we got into the investigation. This is the C Street pump station here, down here in the corner, which is currently undergoing a $6.5 million upgrade. That pump station is offline. It was offline at the time of the break. We were running on a complete bypass system, which was manned that night, 24 hours a day. And the site of the break, there was only actually one break location. We thought we had a couple, one up by Walters, but we ended up determining that we only had one physical break. When we finally were able to drain the line and camera it, this is what we saw. This shows the original main was installed in 1929, the original cast iron pipe, and in 1982 they lined it with a 16-inch polyethylene liner, first generation polyethylene liner pipe. And this is actually at a joint that actually pulled apart and separated. That's what a joint is supposed to look like, a good welded joint. Part of the problem that we had, it did take us a little while to get into the street to find why it broke or where it broke. This is all the power for the island of Nantucket. All three of these three large pipes is all the power lines for National Grid that serve island, all their power. And then the two smaller ones are all the fiber optics for all the communications for the island. In order for us, we had to get approval from National Grid and special design. As you can see, everything, all the shoring is made of wood. We had to have a company from Boston come down that specializes in building shoring out of wood. We had to use special straps. We had to have special tools because all these power lines held 48,000 volts of power. So needless to say, it was a bit eerie and it was a slow process. We were asked why we took so long. This is why we were taking so long. It's because of the dangers of all the power. At one point in time, they were going to shut the entire island off for power. That could have been out for days, but we were able to secure it and build some shoring out of wood and lumber. When we finally got the casing off, this is the actual break. It had separated about 2.5 inches. What had happened, and polyethylene pipe is very subject to expansion, thermal expansion and contraction on different temperatures. The floodwaters that we had that night were at the front door of the pump station, and we have inflow down through that area, through the manhole covers and stuff. When we got hit with that cold shock, that's believed to have been a part of the attributing factor to the cause of the separation. The report is still being developed of actually what happened, but that's the actual break on the left. And this is actually what the repair looks like after we cut it out. All of this stuff is called fusion welding. All these are electrically fused together. And then we poured every place that we had to cut open and repair or investigate, we poured solid and concrete. One of the other problems that we kept running into everywhere we went, all the utilities on the island, all that white conduit is all the fiber optics and telephones for the entire island. This is on Main Street, right in front of Nobby Shop. So all of our excavation that we had to do had to be done by hand. The initial part was done by a machine, and then the guys actually had to get in a hole and dig it all by hand. As you can see, our force main is this one right here in the middle. It's sitting directly on top of the town's 30-inch stormwater system. So it's a stormwater and then the sewer force main, and then all the fiber optics and telephone communications for the whole island was right over the top of it. This site, once we finally got the whole line drained, we cambered all 19,000 feet from the plant all the way to the pump station. And any spot where we saw any kind of deformity, defect, scratch, dent, we dug up and excavated and repaired and cut out. At this site in front of the Nobby Shop this is what we found. The force main had actually been resting on top of the stormwater system and had actually created a slice in the pipe. We don't know for sure if that had been leaking at all for 20, 30 years. We don't know. We saw this break or this small crack, and we instantly cut it out and replaced it. We actually had to grind down the stormwater pipe to put the new pipe back in place. This is the visit we had from Mass DEP, Mass EPA, police, town administration. We actually had the director of Mass DEP on the island. She was great. She came down. They gave us all the resources we need. And you probably saw in the paper, the only way that the repairs started was the emergency management director, Sergeant Coakley here. He was able to get us a Black Hawk helicopter to bring in the contractors to start the work. There was no boats. There was no planes. The state and the island worked. So it was great to see all the teams working together. After the break, we were integral in disinfection of the whole area. Clean Harbors was hired to bring down. We actually completely vacuum swept and washed every single street that could possibly have been contaminated with any sewage, including up to the sides of the buildings. So we didn't take a chance. We went above and beyond what we needed to, but I wasn't going to take a chance with anything. So this is the night that we started cleaning, and when it was all said and done, it was completely disinfected. I had the road blocked off way up here so no one could get through, and every street between this and Lola on South Beach Street was completely disinfected. What's going on now in the future is we're already moving forward to go into planning. I'll be asking for funding at the special town meeting to go into get funding for planning for a new force main. The force main that's we have two force mains that come from C Street. One's a 20-inch ductile iron installed in 1982. That's currently the force main we're using. The other force main originally was installed in 1929 and was lined in the 80s. That we're using it's all back together. It has been online for several months. We've since shut it off for the summer. We're on the bigger one, and the other force main can be used as a spare if we ever have any issues. The one thing that we did find, and I didn't include a picture in it, is at the plant when they did all the lining for the 17,800 and just about 18,000 feet, they left 35 feet of 1929 pipe on site at the plant. So when we recharged the force main after all the work that was done in it, we had another rupture at the plant. We caught it instantly because we were filling it with fresh water and pressure testing it. And when it ruptured right at the plant within 35 feet of the final connection, it was still 1929 cast iron pipe. Going forward, this is kind of hard to see. We're already in the planning to build another force main. And my goal is to get the force main out of town a totally different way and get it away from all the power on the island. Some of the thoughts are to come all the way up to Center Street from C Street, down Center. I want to go across Rose Lane, which is down behind the church, which we have active sewer and active storm drain, which is put in the 1920s. So my plan is to go down every road that we have that has circa 1920 sewer mains, which includes all of Pine Street, all of Atlantic Ave, and then all the way out to the plant. Or we're going to go up all the way to Main Street and then come all the way up Main Street and then out Pleasant Street. The route we've chosen is going to be done in coordination with the water company and the DPW. When we go down a street, we're going to replace everything in one shot. Water, sewer, stormwater, any utilities that need to be done, and then the roads will be paved once, and we hopefully will never have to go in them again. One of the things that's being done that Cormac touched on a little bit with the Watershed area is we're currently into the first year of the Nantucket Harbor and Shimo Plus project for the sewer expansion. This winter, we were able to install all pressure lines and all new sewer lines, all within the Monomoy and Shimo area, with future lines for potentially Shakamo if Shakamo ever goes online as a needs area. All the piping has already been installed. The crews will be coming back after Columbus Day to continue, which once we get the pump stations all in line and wired in and everything else that we need to do and tested, we'll start to go live in some of these sections. We've actually livened up Tashma Lane, McLean Lane, Green Meadow, those are all gravity sewers. The whole area, Monomoy and Shimo is all pressure sewers. So we've taken out approximately 469 connections in the Watershed right now, with potential to remove a lot more in the Shakamo area. So there's a lot of work going on with the sewers. The town recently just acquired, as part of the Shimo project, we now have our own CCTV truck. We don't have to take and contract that out anymore. So you will start to see our CCTV truck out doing CCTV inspections, and so there'll be no more questions. We're going to be able to answer our questions with our own camera work ongoing. With that, I think that's about it. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions coming up, but I'll turn it back over to Cormac. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, David. That was very informative. I really appreciate that. Why don't we get our panel up here, and I'll introduce you all. I'm going to facilitate the conversation, but an introduction. On my far right is Emily Molden, who really helps the Land Council tremendously. She heads up our research and education programs. She's our research ecologist. And then next to her is Jeff Carlson. He is the head of the Natural Resources Department. Next to Jeff is Roberto Santamaria, who is the head of the Health Department. And then, as you know, David Gray. Any questions for David on his presentation as it's fresh at all? Anything? I'll throw in one if there's not one. Maybe Jeff and Roberto, you could touch on the testing that was done as it related to some of the water quality, both health and ecosystem, and then also how lucky we were it was actually in the wintertime, the break.
Sure. So just like to say thank you guys for having us again this year. This is a wonderful event and a good chance for us to get some information out and see some faces that we don't always get to see. I'll touch briefly on some of the nutrient testing that we did as a part of the sewer break, and then I'll turn it over to Roberto to discuss some of the bacterial and pathogens that we were concerned with related to the break. So immediately after the break had occurred, we began doing sampling on all of the outfall points, the discharge and the effluent as just kind of a baseline. And we were looking specifically from our natural resources end at what the nutrient component was going to be. So how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, and some of the other constituents that we were looking for. And we tested those points on a daily basis. And then once those levels returned to normal, after the break had stopped and the pumping had stopped, we tested until it returned to what we expected it to be, and then continued testing for another 3 or 4 weeks. And then we did a monthly test. And then we entered our regular summer program. But we really saw that those nutrient levels obviously spiked up during the event very quickly, and then really took about a week to 10 days to kind of completely subside back down to what we had expected for a normal background nitrogen level. So we really got very lucky in a sense that with the time of year and things that were happening, that the nutrient loading that we were there, given the flushing of the area, really wasn't anything that seemed to be prolonged or longer lasting. So I guess I'll turn it to you to talk about.
So when we talk about a sewer discharge, of course, the first thing that people think about is, the E. coli issues, things like that, cholera, those types of bacteria. But because of the temperature of the water, because of the time of year and the type and the amount of flow that we had, David, you might be able to touch up on this in a little bit, but there was a lot of seawater in that outflow as well, and stormwater in that outflow. The bacterial load was actually surprisingly low. When it hit that water, they ended up either dying off due to the temperature shock, or they ended up going into what's called sporulation, where they create little spores so that they can survive, basically a hibernation. What we were mostly worried about was actually the viruses. Luckily, that area of the harbor and the harbor as a whole flushes out really quickly. So whenever there was an outgoing tide, all of that flushing that was happening in that section, the map's already closed, where the discharge was, it's really close to let me actually stand up and do this.
There you
it's really close to the area here. So whenever the outflow was going, it was going straight up and out rather than up, in, and around. So when we started doing when DMF did, Department of Marine Fisheries, did their tests on the shellfish, when we did our monitoring for any shellfish and any fish and anything that was being harvested, there was actually no viral contamination, no viral loads. There was no major bacterial contamination because everything was in kind of a hibernating state. So we were actually doubly lucky that this happened not only in the winter when the flow, the sewer usage and the water usage is lower, but also all the shellfish was dormant. So they weren't taking in these high levels of bacterial loading. So we were extremely lucky. And we've monitored through our state Department of Public Health. We have something called MAVEN, the Massachusetts Virtual Epidemiologic Network. Now you know why we call it MAVEN. When I monitor MAVEN, it is all the records of reportable infectious diseases that are attributable to anything that happens on the island. And I get a notification whenever there is a reportable disease founded or confirmed here. And not once did we get a hit. Nobody ended up getting sick from anything that happened attributed to this break. So David's response, DPW's response, actually in particular Sewer's response was just phenomenal, and the reaction was so quick and so effective that we dodged a major public health bullet here. And then the decontamination from where all the public was going through, the spectators, as David put it, by isolating that whole area, we were able to prevent any sort of cross-contamination issue. So it was if anything, the biggest takeaway from the public health side here was the response really took care of a lot of things, and it prevented an even greater disaster. So, thank you.
In the paper, I had stated that we discharged about 2.7 million gallons of sewage into the harbor. That was not all sewage. It was a mixture of stormwater and sewage, and that was shown in our testing. The water temperature levels and the salinity levels and all showed that it was a mixture of both. It was the worst time to happen because of the weather, the storms, no boats, no planes, but it was the best time it could have ever happened. And the support that my team had from the community, we had people just driving up to us and just giving us bags of food or coffee or anything. The contractors actually went home one night and they had a complete catered dinner at their house. The support we got from everybody was phenomenal, and the team itself. But it was estimated 2.7 million gallons discharged into 3.9 trillion, roughly, is what the harbor holds for gallonage. So it was a teaspoonful, basically, if you take and compare the two. But we did what we had to do that night. So.
Yeah, and if it was in the summertime, that teaspoonful would have expanded exponentially in terms of the bacteria, the viruses, the algae that would have been feeding off all the nitrates and nitrogen that's coming out of that. So again, reiterating how much we dodged a bullet by it being in the wintertime from an ecological standpoint. Secondly, if you could find a silver lining to this, there actually. I try to find one, but being an advocate, environmental non-government advocate, and trying to point the government in the right direction, I think the silver lining in this one is that it's really forced the town to look at its existing sewer infrastructure and to work with David to, again, inspect all the lines, to replace the sewer main, and do everything that is in their power to really make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Any questions? Any other questions? We do have a mic, and Meg's going to go around and pass it so everybody can hear, okay? Thanks.
At the time of the break, was it an incoming tide or an outgoing tide?
At the time of the break, surprisingly enough, was just as the tide was receding. And what that did is when the tide receded, we do have still some II issues, infiltration and inflow through manhole covers, old sewer mains still in the area. When the pressure from the flooding receded is when we had the largest flow come in. The flooding actually was keeping everything at bay, but as soon as it receded, it was able to allow a lot of the water to come in. So it was on the outgoing is when the rupture happened.
But there was multiple tidal cycles during the entire break as well. Yeah, it's just the third thing that is fortunate is where it is in relationship to the harbor itself, is that it's approximately one of the closest places to the channel, to the jetties going out, and that's where the greatest sort of strength is to circulate it out.
So Watershed Shoal is a place where I often go clamming,
Yes.
and I'm a little bit skeptical just because the water's flowing by that, incoming and outgoing, and how was that affected over there?
Jeff, you want to address that one?
So that was obviously a big concern of ours. This is during our commercial bay scallop season as well, and it was something that we wanted to address. And the Division of Marine Fisheries came out once they were able to get to the island, and we did a series of shellfish tests where they took a collection of clams, oysters, and bay scallops from multiple areas within the harbor, including the Watershed and kind of Hussey Shoal, which is in there as well. And in all of our tests, including the first test, which was closest to the break, we didn't have anything that would have directly failed their pathogen concerns or shellfish sanitation concerns. There's a precautionary closure that comes with any sewage break, whether you're on Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard or on the Cape. Any sewage that gets into the water usually has a minimum 21-day closure, with the exception of things like bay scallops where you're not eating the whole animal. And Nantucket was back open to all shellfishing within that 21 days. So we met that minimum closure, and that closure was justified through the Division of Marine Fisheries by actual shellfish samples being taken and water samples being taken and compared at the same time. So we don't have any concerns with the collection of shellfish in the harbor currently. We didn't really then. And we would definitely encourage people that there's no issues with any of the clams, oysters, scallops during the season and things that come out of the harbor or are farmed in the harbor for people to consume at this point. Everything is passed, and we continued our regular shellfish sanitation surveys. We actually did one this last Tuesday, and those results have come back, and they're all well within what we normally expect, and there are no shellfish concerns at this point.
In the back, Meg? Actually, before we go to you, since she's right here, if you could give it to Peter.
This question is for Roberto. It's really remarkable, the response that was made, and I know that beneath all of this is a tremendous amount of water quality testing. And I wonder if you could just comment on the kind of testing that's done now, how you get it done when you don't have boats and planes flying. And I've heard a rumor that there might be a water quality testing facility in the works on island.
Yes, so currently, in a situation like this, when the boats aren't running, when the planes aren't flying, naturally, obviously, we can't get samples off the island. We can't even get ourselves off the island, let alone a bottle of water to get tested. So that was definitely tough. But once we started getting the samples off the island, getting them to the laboratory, the general process is we actually have to take the sample, get the samples packed in ice, which at that time of the year wasn't a problem. And then we have to fill out a full chain of custody form, which means if David takes the sample, he has to sign. And then when he's going to transfer the sample to me, I have to sign saying that I am receiving the samples from David Gray. And then we both sign. And then from there, it goes to the next person off island, who I have to transfer to them. They sign to say they're receiving the sample, and then that goes to the laboratory. That sort of a chain of custody form is to prevent any sort of tampering with the samples, or to provide proof that these samples are the actual original samples that were sent out, so that we're not faking it. So the issue with that sort of sampling is we don't have a laboratory on island. The nearest laboratory that can do any basic sampling is in Barnstable County. And even then, that's just, like I said, the basic samples, just if there's a presence of bacteria, not what type of bacteria. In this sort of case, we need to find out what type of bacteria and what type of viruses are in there. So they have to then take a sample of our sample and transfer it to another laboratory that's able to do this and test for the types of bacteria. So it's a very long, very arduous, very expensive project. And that is just for one sample. So for example, I was talking today to our Wanacommet Water Company director, Mark, and he was explaining how he takes 40 bacterial samples a month. And that is just for the bacteria. When he has to take the well samples, he has to take not only the 40 well samples for the bacteria, he also has to take 8 what's called volatile organic compounds, which is chemicals like fuel, oil, things like that. He has to take 8 of those samples. He has to take SOCs, which I forgot what SOC stands, soluble organic compounds. He also has to take all the secondary contaminants, heavy metals. So when all is said and done, every month or so, we're sending off the 40 samples plus, and that's just drinking water. Sewer and wastewater has to send out a bunch of other samples as well. The biggest issue with all of this is that because of the chain of custody issue, we have to pay a courier per sample. So that is $12 a sample just for the bacterial testing, multiplied by 40 every time we take it every month. On top of that, we have the beach sampling that Jeff does, the wastewater sampling that David does. We have some landfill sampling from all the groundwater from the landfill. And then we also have the beach sampling from the health department and the drinking water samples from the wells.
So fairly inefficient and a lot of money.
Extremely inefficient. Oh, and even better, if you want to sample any of your own well water, you can only do it on Tuesdays before 9:15 a.m.
And what are we thinking to maybe improve that?
So as a result of all of this, we have found that we end up spending way too much money to do these samples. So we started looking at the feasibility of possibly having a laboratory here on the island. David, Jeff, Mark, Rob, and I have been talking about this for about a year. And then lo and behold, the skies opened up and we have found between the Land Council and a couple donors, we're looking in the Shellfish Association, we're able to start really gaining traction on building a laboratory here. Today, we met with a consultant about possibly looking into designing a laboratory and what that would look like and what type of testing we can do. So that way we can get all of these tests done at a convenient time between normal business hours. Anybody can walk in and drop off any samples that they want to do. And that is year round, full time for all of you at a major cost savings to the town, a major cost savings to the taxpayer, and a major cost savings to yourself if you ever want to do your own sampling.
So definite economic implications, but I think Em's probably going to talk about sort of the implications in terms of additional testing that we can then get done.
Well, and I also just wanted to add on to what Roberto just said to compound the challenge of getting samples off island, that we're pretty much restricted to the ferry or plane schedules as well, which is another real challenge because when we take some of these samples, there are certain parameters, fecal coliform, et cetera, where they have to be analyzed within a certain number of hours of being collected. And so if you have a ferry that gets canceled or a flight that gets delayed, then all of a sudden, all of the field time you've spent going out collecting those samples is kind of a waste because you can't get them to the lab in time to be analyzed anyway. So just to sort of add to the cost issue, I think as a nonprofit and governmental community, we're really interested in focusing on this for the island.
Yeah. So in summary, lots more to come on that. We're in the stage right now where we are going to be working with a consultant to essentially design the facility, come up with some numbers. This hopefully will be a nonprofit and governmental sort of collaboration. The Shellfish Association is right now committed and leading the charge. The Land Council definitely wants to provide support services to that. But you're going to be hearing about this a lot more. Definitely there's going to have to be some government municipal expenditures on it, but I think we're going to be looking to the private fundraising community as well. Any other questions? Right in the back there, this gentleman.
The look of that red line of sewerage upgrading that you proposed, Mr. Gray, About how long will that take? How disruptive might it be? And is there even a rough estimate of the cost to do that kind of upgrading?
As far as the cost goes, we can only guess. We're looking at probably another $15 to $20 million, I would assume. Best guess, depending if it's the price is going to go up if we decide to go up Main Street because of the cobblestones and having to restore those surfaces. If we try to take and stay within some of the side roads that I'm proposing, disruption should be very limited, and we wouldn't be able to do any work in the summertime, just like the construction has stopped for the summer season now. But again, if we're able to do all these projects together, the cost should go down. We already have projects listed to come up in the next couple of years, and between us and the water company, we have a 10-year plan, and a lot of the roads that we're considering are on those listed already. So if we were to bid out a sewer project to replace all the sewer mains on Pine Street to the plant, those costs could drastically go down if we do these all jointly. So there could be some silver lining to this. Trying to do all these together, costs could go way down. I don't expect they're going to go up at all. And we'll be able to plan for the future going forward with sizing of all the mains and replacing of everything in the way.
I had a question. I think we talked about this earlier when we were sort of thinking about this State of the Harbor Forum, but it's important for you all to walk away from on an annual basis to just get a feel of what the water quality is in the harbor. And Jeff, if you could maybe just elaborate, quick summary, brief summary on the water quality in the various areas of the harbor and sort of what's the benchmark that we use to determine health.
Sure. I knew you were going to ask this, so I made a little slide. If you could put it up there. So in just really crude terms here, when we evaluate our harbor health, the number that we use and that's set by Mass DEP, we always talk about our TMDL, our total maximum daily load, and we're really looking at in terms of total nitrogen in milligrams per liter. So I know the numbers are kind of confusing just to run through, so we'll try to go through pretty simply, but the threshold that we're really looking for nitrogen-wise here is 0.35, and that number is set because that's what we're looking for to support our eelgrass populations is essentially our indicator thing. And just if people can see, there's Station 2A, and it's labeled Sentinel Station. So we base, kind of achieving this goal or not on that station. As that station, that and NAN 3 are typically being in the head of the harbor, the least circulated and the most impaired. And then Pulpus Harbor is kind of considered a little bit separately. But just to run through those really quickly, obviously 3, 2A, 6, and 5 are above their TMDL threshold. In general, they're all getting closer to the goal, but they are currently not meeting the goal. And then all of the other stations are below. So that's really good news. That's water that can help support eelgrass. Eelgrass is able to restore itself in some of these areas. You can look at management options where you might be able to do eelgrass transplanting and restoration. And I know that's something that the Land Council is exploring this year and looking at other programs. And then I know I can't see the number through David's head, but there is the one yellow station, NAN 7, which is right in the Children's Beach, Brant Point area. And amazingly, that is spot on the goal. It's important to note that for the ones that are below, we like them to be solidly below because we want to be able to absorb year-to-year fluctuations in weather and precipitation and temperature can really control what those inputs may or may not be. Obviously, in years where you have lots of rain, you get lots of overland flow, and some of those inputs can come in. Years that there are, high temperatures, you can have algal blooms and things with excess nutrients that can cause and have impacts on water quality. So we like to be below enough to absorb that year-to-year change and keep our average below. So the good news is we're getting closer. I feel like every year we get to change one of these stations from red to green, but there's still work to be done for sure.
And certainly more room for improvement, even in the green areas, to get it well below that TMDL.
Absolutely. I think the real important number, just to kind of touch on it quickly, is our regulatory number is 0.35 milligrams per liter. A lot of the literature and research talks about eelgrass really doing well in the closer to 0.27 to 0.28 range, which is a significant drop from there. So it'd be nice to get as close to that as possible, because at the end of the day, we want to support healthy habitats and healthy invertebrates, and have healthy shellfish populations and fish populations and good oxygen numbers, and be able to have a really diverse functioning ecosystem.
And Em, do you want to just touch upon the supplemental testing that that you're conducting, and sort of the necessity for that, just to see how it compares to some of those stations such as Nantucket and whatnot?
Sure. So this year, the Land Council has teamed up a little bit with the town to add a little bit of supplemental sampling to what they typically go out and get from the harbor every month. And the reason that Cormac and I approached the town about doing this is, as we started to look at the eelgrass beds adjacent to the shoreline in various locations, we have a sense that they're likely being impacted by the fresh water that's coming into the harbor from the surrounding watershed. And there are certain areas where those freshwater seeps are pretty significant and draining kind of a large area of land all in one location. And while having these sentinel stations are really important in order to give a big picture water quality snapshot of the harbor and what's going on there, we really wanted to take a closer look at what was actually happening in and around these eelgrass beds that we're really focused on and concerned about. So just to kind of answer the curiosity question, we are going out a few times this summer on the same morning at the same time when the town is collecting samples at their sentinel stations, and we are collecting some additional samples from a few points right along the shoreline where we know that there's potentially nutrient-rich fresh water entering the harbor, just to see if the nutrient levels are the same, to make sure that when the town is monitoring these sentinel stations, they're also monitoring what's happening in and around the eelgrass beds. So we just started doing that this summer, last month, and we're sort of waiting for those results. But again, it's just another way to make sure that we're covering all our bases as far as what's actually happening in the ecosystem where we're most concerned.
Questions? We have a bunch here. Just wait for the mic.
A simple question, probably a simple answer, but is it normal to place such high-powered lines next to sewer systems only because of ease? Or, I mean, was there any fear of a medical problem in all this?
The question was, is it sort of standard practice to have cross lines in terms of you're digging up a hole and you're seeing that amount of different lines that are in the hole?
I don't know if it's not a common practice anymore by any means. Anything we do now, sewer and water have to be separated by a minimum of 10 feet. We still currently have manholes within the core district that have sewer, water, and stormwater all within the same manhole, all within the same trench. That's one thing that we're finding on a lot of roads when we go to dig. With Farmer Street, for example, we had a sewer break on Farmer Street over the last year and a half, 2 years now, and we could not fix the sewer main because the water main and the old gas main were resting right on top of it. So we had to excavate the entire road and move everything out of the way. So it may have been a common practice years ago because of ease of excavation, but not anymore. We don't.
Right there? Meg, right behind you. Yeah.
So I have a three-part question. What do you think this cost, this break, in total? I mean, think about Black Hawk helicopters and guys coming in from the state. That would be one. Number two, if we have this old pipe system, is this just a warning that, okay, next summer, next winter, we're going to have another one of these things? And then third, how can you alert the public? What did you learn? You talked about 2,500 pounds of disposable wipes in the system. Is there any way you can alert the public, particularly in the summer, where we have this surge of population, and alert the real estate people and all the homes that are being rented and all the hotels to really try to treat our island sewer system with a little more care? So how much did it cost? Is this just a warning? And number three, what can you do to help the public cooperate?
Question.
Some of the numbers, it was between $3.5 and $5 million for that break itself. the information, and one of the ways that we got out information, and now this was in the middle of winter, we removed 2,500 pounds of wipes. You can double and triple that in the summertime. And we have a screening system at the plant where it's constantly removing the waste. And we remove waste from the treatment plant by dumpster loads, by tons every week of anything from dental floss to hair to you name it. If it goes down the toilet, we find it. And the third question, as far as a warning, it opened my eyes more. I'm a lifelong resident, and I've had my own business for many years, so I had an idea what some of the sewers look like. This definitely has opened our eyes. That was one of the reasons why in the Shimo Nantucket Harbor Plus project, we purchased our own camera truck so that we can have answers right away. We had 100,000 linear feet of sewers cambered this winter by a contractor and cleaned. And again, that opened up a lot of, we knew we had some potential areas of problems, but we now know what we have. As early as Monday morning, we were on York Street camera and a sewer line up there to find out what's going on at the end of the line. We could get only within 100 feet of that issue because we found another major hole in the sewer line. So this was a warning, and I think it's got everyone's attention. And we are going forward. At the last town meeting, we had $26.5 million worth of funding approved for sewer replacement projects going forward over the next few years. So it's got everyone's attention, and we're moving to solve the issues now. So one thing I did forget, though, I wanted, before I forget it, after the sewer break and after we shut off all the pumping into the harbor, we actually hired a diver to go down and do an extensive dive of the whole area of the basin of the yacht club to see what he could find, paper, plastics, or anything. And I think he found one plastic piece. Other than that, the screener caught everything else. So,
And the second part of that question, or maybe it was the third, in terms of outreach. Outreach and education is a day-to-day challenge. Just something that happened over the wintertime, early spring, out in the Sconset area. Dave was getting massive amounts of, did you guys determine at the end of the day it was paint?
from all of our testing, everything's showing is that was some type of paint. And everyone I know has painted their bedroom or their living room with latex paint, and it's washable by water. But when you figure you have 60 or 70 painters doing that all at the same time, Sconset in the wintertime only handles between 18,000 and 22,000 gallons of flow a day. So even as little as 1 gallon of paint can completely wipe out our plant, which it did. We actually had to haul sewage from Surfside to Sconset to keep the plant alive on a daily basis.
So major outreach campaign after that. And we're still trying to do with this. So it's just a constant sort of battle to get it out there. But it's definitely duly noted that everybody has to do their job in terms of telling everybody the most appropriate way to manage their own uses.
And we're working closely with Roberto and Jeff and Cormac with a upcoming grease program. We call it FOG program, fats, oils, and grease. The wipes, no wipes in the pipes, cease the grease kind of. So we're all working to get to the same. Grease is another. Just when you cook your bacon in the morning, just if you wash it out in the sink, it all ends up in the pipes in the street. Just wipe the plate out. Little bits help. And one thing that was very effective this winter was the public announcements that were on the High Line, the steamship, I believe at the airport, Dreamland Theater. Everything was taken, asking for water conservation, and just don't leave the sink running when you brush your teeth. And the drastic change in numbers was amazing.
Kind of similar to our efforts with educating the community about the fertilizer regulations and appropriate fertilizer use. It's a constant challenge to really educate and keep people at that level to really pay attention. There's a question over there, right there.
I actually had two questions. The first one was, should any of us be concerned about the red thumbs down at the head of the harbor and the oyster farms up there?
So that red thumbs down in the head of the harbor only speaks towards nutrients. And really, I know one of our oyster growers is hiding in the back. Simon is there. And Simon will be the first one to tell you that his oysters filter, 30 to 50 gallons of water per oyster per day. What have you done for the harbor today? It's Simon's tagline that he always likes to tell me when I talk to him. So of all spots to be, as far as we're concerned, those oysters are providing us a great benefit. And we have no concern. Those guys go through really more so than any of the shellfishing industries on island, the handling protocols and testing that those guys have to do for everything from Vibrio to other possible concerns. They really go through an extraordinary effort to keep those things shaded and iced, and they have to make temperature. And they have protocols where, if it's out of the water, it can only be out for 2.5 hours before it has to reach temperature. Those guys go through extraordinary efforts. And I think they, for the most part, do a really wonderful job. And those oysters are of zero concern. I will probably eat some from our friends at the Raw Bar Yoho in the back as soon as we're done talking. And anytime I can get my hands on them, I'm more than happy to eat some. So,
Simon, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I had one more question.
Good.
You were talking about the pump at Children's Beach that empties out into the basin there. Is that just runoff from the streets that runs just raw into the harbor? Or is that filtered in some way?
The stormwater system, the stormwater pumping system that's at Children's Beach is just, there are some what's called storm scepters that are at within the roadway down there that actually have they have grit chambers, oil and water separators. So there is some minor protection and treatment before it gets discharged, but it's just a straight runoff from all the storm drains in the whole Hulbert Avenue area that go through these storm scepters, which grab the grit and oil and some of the other volatile organic compounds or some of the heavy metals, and then it's just discharged, flowed out into the harbor.
And that's a good segue into the stormwater sampling project that Emily's doing on behalf of the Land Council, working with the Land Council too.
Yeah, I'll just touch
working
on
with the
that.
town, excuse me.
A little bit. Last year, we initiated a stormwater sampling program, and I think I talked about it in more detail at the first State of the Harbor Forum. But we've continued that this year, and I've been working pretty closely with the DPW to identify outfall pipes that do drain the town's stormwater, all the impervious surfaces directly into the harbor. We have been identifying pipes that are appropriate and able to be sampled to try to get a better sense of what kind of metals and nutrients and coliform, oil and grease might be entering the harbor from those point sources. And also, in order to help the town and the DPW prioritize potential upgrades to the infrastructure in the future. And I know that the DPW right now is looking into some capital improvements, and we're working with them on a couple of locations. I actually have a slide that just shows the 4 outfalls that we're actually currently sampling. The Children's Beach outfall, which is actually adjacent to the Nantucket Yacht Club at this point. One of the Easy Street outfalls, the outfall that's right at the base of the town pier and the beach, which drains the town parking lot and part of Washington Street Extension, and then also an outfall in the Consu Springs area. And the town pier parking lot is a great example of one. The Land Council has actually hired some consultants from off island to come and help us design best management practices, some more bioretention areas that we might be able to put into this little catchment area to help to treat some of the water before it enters the harbor. In that picture in the bottom left there, you can see that just a typical rainstorm washes an awful lot of silt and material from the parking lot, from Washington Street Extension, and a little bit of that surrounding watershed directly into the harbor water. So this is one area that we're looking to work with the DPW on doing some improvements to, hopefully in the next few years. And I know they're looking at a couple of other areas as well.
A question over there? Yep. She'll come.
So assuming we go through and we get all the upgrades we need and get everything working in tip-top shape, what kind of population growth can this handle? Like how big can our year-round population grow before we have to etch a sketch and start over?
Good question. See if we can get an answer.
Both of us, actually. That's a multifaceted question, mainly because we're running into there are individual limiting factors. So, for example, I believe the treatment plant is rated for 7 million gallons.
4 million gallons a day.
4 million gallons a day. I know the water company has a permit that only allows them to pump so much. And then as far as septic systems are concerned, that's land limiting. You need to have the amount of space in order to put in a septic system. Our sole source aquifer is a big thing to look into. So any sort of runoff and contamination has to be contained. Planning, and that sort of thing. So all of those have to work together to reach that critical mass of where it can't be sustainable. We are using limiting factors in a lot of things. So, for example, in the health department, the septic systems and in all of the watersheds, we're limiting 1 bedroom for every 10,000 square feet of land. So if you have only half an acre, you can only put 2 bedrooms on that half acre. So and we have put in many regulations to clean up the amount of the type of water that's being released from the septic system so that when it does get back into the aquifer, it doesn't contaminate. And then I see a select member in the back that I've had conversations with where we're looking into possibly reusing IA system effluent as irrigation, because that way it would eliminate the need for fertilization on top of it. So it's that sort of thing. Unfortunately, Massachusetts is one of only like 8 states that doesn't allow it. So it's going to take some work. But if we can get that passed, it's a major thing. I'm sorry? What's that called? Oh, it's a law. The state Title V doesn't allow the reuse of septic system effluent, untreated water. But it's already has a high nutrient load like fertilizers do. So if you can reuse that water, you don't have to fertilize. And I'll let David answer the question about the limit at the sewer.
We are currently permitted for 4 million gallons a day. That has been upped in the last 2 years. We used to be 3.5 million. We're now 4 million gallons a day. Our limiting factor is our discharge beds. When you fly over, you see all the square sand filter beds. That's what limits us on our flow per day. This time of year now, we're seeing flows between 1.9 million gallons a day and 2.3 million gallons a day. And I know that the water company is recently pumping over 4 million gallons a day. So only 2 million gallons of that water is getting to us. Other than that, it's most likely irrigation. So that's the plant is designed to handle peak loads of 7.7 million gallons for short periods of time. During the major rainstorm 2 years ago now, July 5th, when we had like 5 inches of rain in an hour, we were seeing flows at the plant of over 12.6 million gallons instantaneous for a few hours at a time. We were able to handle it and treat everything, but that was very shocking to see those kind of numbers coming in a major storm.
Thus, the real true need to combine the work that Emily and the town is doing on the stormwater and investigate where some potential crossover is with the stormwater system and the sewer system. One, to remove the stormwater that would end up at the wastewater treatment plant to get some extra capacity, but also on the other end, if some of the sewer got into the stormwater in the opposite way and went out into the harbor. Any other, we got time for a few more. Right over there.
Hi, David, for you, shouldn't there be or was there not a low pressure alarm system and shutdown system on the pumps, so if the pumps are under pressurized, it would shut down?
We actually had the resident engineer on site that night, and as soon as he saw the break, actually the flows increased. We were going from about 1,800 gallons per minute up to 2,300 gallons per minute. That was his first key factor to take in, and from the time the break occurred to the time we shut it down was less than 15 minutes. Even if we didn't have anyone on site at the C Street pump station, we do not have remote control or any active. When the station was active then, the new station that's currently under a $6.5 million upgrade, hopefully going online by the end of July, beginning of August. All those means that you're talking about now are going to be in effect. On our other large pump stations right now, if something happens in the discharge, they have check valves, and if that flow slows down or stops, it sets an alarm off and shuts the whole station off. Right. That will be in effect at C Street coming up.
Very good. Another question. I believe the town 2, maybe 3 years ago applied for permits to open up, dredge the entrance to Pulpus Harbor and maybe between Weir Point and Pocomo Point to improve the circulation there. I don't know who that question
Jeff,
should
you
go
want
to.
to jump on the Pulpus one, and then maybe the potential for doing some work on Pocomo.
Sure.
One of the limiting factors, I think we've talked about this in terms of water quality health, is not just the inputs coming in, but the actual circulation of the harbor. And very limited towards the head and towards the Pulpus, and just some additional inputs on that is going to have such a greater effect than if it was the same amount of inputs in a very heavily circulated area such as Monomoy.
Sure. So I can just briefly touch. I'm not the best person to ask about the Pulpus Harbor thing, but I'm probably the closest we're going to get today. It has been permitted. The permitting has been completed through the state and through the local conservation commission. And I believe that dredging was delayed, excuse me, due to a funding issue, but I believe that's slated to now go forward this fall. I know the projections for that dredging aren't showing a real benefit to water quality within Pulpus Harbor for the amount that's being removed, especially with the inputs that come into that harbor. And then other sites that are kind of...
And let me just jump in. The impetus for the project wasn't for water quality, it's for navigation purposes.
Correct.
So they did some secondary analysis. Does it help water quality?
Right.
But
And then
it was really for navigation.
Yep. And then the second area that we've kind of started talking about within the harbor is in the Pocomo area, where anyone that's boated into the head of the harbor knows you have to make that big kind of S-turn to get into the head of the harbor now. The Cuspid Spits on Co2 are kind of headed towards Pocomo and Pocomo towards Co2. And that area has been kind of started to be investigated for possible dredging out for navigation mainly, but to also see if there's potential benefits to increasing the circulation within the head of the harbor from that direction. And I was going to add in really quickly to your question about population and planning a bit. One of the things the town has also been looking at as far as planning in any of these areas that doesn't relate to population, but is something that I think is very kind of germane to that topic, is anything that the town is also looking at planning for stormwater or even sewer upgrades. We've really started to focus in on looking at climate change and sea level rise and projecting for, obviously sizing stormwater appropriately to handle bigger, more frequent storms, potential, sea level comes up, the amount that it's going to have to handle from tidal surge could be greater as well. And really start looking at those factors when we're putting designs together, kind of coupled with potential population growth, is something that is really important in these coastal areas to be looking at. And that's my shameless plug as well for people to participate in the coastal resiliency process. In the plan, we had a forum last night. Hopefully, I have more to come. But that's something where if you live in these neighborhoods, if you live in Brant Point, if you live in Shimo, those things are going to be coming up more and more, and you're going to definitely be seeing regulations that are adapting to our changing world and houses coming up. I mean, I think it's evident on Brant Point now already, where you see houses that are substantially higher than what they were just 5 to 7 years ago. So it's something that is part of that process as well.
All right, well, we're sort of wrapping up to upcoming. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that we did at C Street as part of this whole coastal resiliency, and that being one of the most critical infrastructures downtown, is in the design of the new station, is we incorporated a structural flood wall around the entire facility that's actually built into the building. If you happen to go down by there now, you can hardly tell that it's part of it. But before the project started, when they changed the new FEMA and MEMA flood maps, elevation 8 was where the old flood levels were. Those now 9, elevation 9. The first floor, the front door at C Street was elevation 5. So we were technically already 4 feet below where we needed to be. The new facility has a complete structural wall around the entire facility, the entire generator facility, the transformer pad, and we have waterproof stop logs that we can put into the slides within the masonry work so that water will not be able to get into the building itself. And what we've also done is all the pumps that we have installed in the basement, we call it the dry pit, are all dry pit submersible pumps. That pump station will be able to operate if the basement's completely flooded with 26 feet of water. All the electrical circuits and everything are now above elevation 9 in the whole structure. So if water was to ever get in, that building will still be able to operate.
I want to end it just to touch on a couple of things that Emily is working on eelgrass. But what I'd sort of like to set it up with is that our eelgrass ecosystems is sort of the canary in the coal mine. But also saying that we have one of the most healthy eelgrass populations as it relates to other municipalities in the Commonwealth and actually the Northeast. So it's just a factor of just all of the land preservation work that we've been doing in the harbor watershed, the water quality work, some of the other things that we've done, and just essentially some of the sort of geology of our systems. But we still are seeing some pretty significant eelgrass loss. Just as an example, this is Fulling Mill here. It's where we come out on Fulling Mill Road if you go scalloping, right around in here. This is Folgers Marsh, the UMass field station right here coming out. You see all the eelgrass? This is all eelgrass right in here. Fairly healthy just from the aerial. See how sparse it is? Can't really see it too well here, but that's no eelgrass anymore. Pretty much bare. Monomoy in March of 2012. Really healthy eelgrass bed. Again, even with water quality that is of suitable levels, you got a lot of impacts on this bed. That's February. Fairly drastic reduction here. So again, it relates to what Jeff is saying. You have water quality levels that are hovering around good areas, but we really have to do our best to look at all the impacts and go from there. And then maybe, Em, you could just touch upon some of the things that you're doing in terms of the investigation of the eelgrass going forward.
Sure. So we had the eelgrass in Nantucket Harbor mapped back in 2015. The Land Council and the town worked together to get Charlie Costello out here from the state. And what his mapping showed us was that between 95 and 2015, there was significant declines throughout Nantucket Harbor of up to about 30% in some areas. And having that big picture was really important as a reminder, and we wanted to start to get a better sense of what was actually happening on the ground in more specific sites. So the Land Council has been working with some researchers from Boston University to evaluate and do a better health assessment of some of the eelgrass beds in different parts of the harbor. We have these 6 sites that you can see up on the screen where we're assessing the structural health of the beds, so looking at shoot density, blade length, epiphyte growth on the grass blades, also measuring light penetration to see how appropriate it is for eelgrass growth in different areas. And then another really exciting component of that research is a stable isotope analysis, where we're actually going to be analyzing these stable isotopes within the eelgrass blades that will help, hopefully, to determine the source of the nutrients in the eelgrass itself. So by comparing those also to numbers that have been developed in other regions, we should be able to get a sense of whether the eelgrass in these different parts of the harbor are getting their nitrogen from fertilizer, from wastewater, from other sources out in Nantucket Sound, which is going to be really interesting for us, and also I think serve as an exciting baseline going forward. So if we take another look at this in 5 to 10 years, we might actually be able to see a change that has occurred from the fertilizer regulations or from sewering certain areas. We might actually be able to see a difference in the nitrogen that these plants are taking up.
And just jumping in, if I could, this this project was partially funded by the Great Harbor Yacht Club. Many thanks to Roger, Stephen, and the rest of the Great Harbor Yacht Club folks. Thank you.
Right. Yes. Thank you very much for that. So that's something that's ongoing right now this summer that we're pretty excited about. And then the other project that we're just in the permitting phases for right now is a transplant project that we hope to conduct out off Monomoy Beach this fall. And as Cormac showed some aerials earlier, there's a couple more up there on the screen. There's just been significant loss right off Monomoy Beach of eelgrass over the last decade. And we think that a lot of this could be from shoaling and sand movement into the area, but we haven't seen this bed recover. As you heard from some of what Jeff presented, the water quality in this area is better than a lot of the harbor and should be good enough to support eelgrass growth. So right now we're trying to get a permit to try a transplant method to take some eelgrass shoots from some healthy beds, donor beds in the harbor, and transplant them in a mosaic in this area to try to give it a little bit of a kickstart and see if over the next year or two we can actually reestablish some of the eelgrass beds that used to be here.
Great, thanks, Em. I know we had one final question right here, if we could.
We've been concerned about the fertilizers, the chemical fertilizers, washing into the water and impacting the eelgrass and the scallops. Well, in Hawaii, they're looking to ban certain sunscreens that contain the chemicals oxybenzone and octinoxate because they feel they negatively impact and harm the marine life and ecosystems. And there's a bill right now to try and ban any sunscreens in Hawaii that have those two chemicals. Now, if the Hawaiian Islands are concerned about that and their ecosystem and marine life, is that something maybe Nantucket should look into and have some concerns about?
You want to just repeat the question real briefly?
So the question was, in Hawaii, they're looking to ban specific sunscreens that contain specific chemicals that harm the reefs and the eelgrass beds and their harbors and their oceans in general. And why can't we look into doing a similar thing? In short, the shortest answer is the state won't let us. We can't do a local ban on fertilizers because that is regulated.
We can do fertilizers, just not pesticides and other things.
Yeah, no, we can't even ban the fertilizer. We can ban it within specific areas to prevent runoff, but we can't just say you're not allowed to sell fertilizer on the island.
But the point is, could those two chemicals impact our marine life and our ecosystems? And could we make suggestions of which sunscreens to use that may not have these chemicals? Or should we see if those two chemicals impact us at all? Impacting Hawaii's marine life, you probably think
No.
it'll be a longer.
Absolutely. We can definitely keep doing the suggestions. We can get the information out there. Currently, the straw campaign has been really getting traction. Something like the sunscreen would be great. To do a downright ban would take the state legislature to do so, which is unfortunate. I would love to do the ban like you said.
Hawaii's trying to introduce a bill.
Oh, absolutely. We can definitely try.
That's definitely in further investigation by the local board of health that would then be working with our state representatives to do that.
Absolutely.
Em, final comments?
Oh, I was just going to add to that. I did actually see an article about that recently and was talking to our eelgrass experts about that exact topic. And her understanding is that those chemicals aren't going to directly affect eelgrass. That's not to say there aren't other organisms out there that could very well be affected by them, but she wasn't too concerned specifically about them impacting the eelgrass. But
Hope they don't impact the clams and scallops.
well, that's another.
Thank you, everyone. We've tried to keep this short, but it didn't really work. There's so many topics to discuss here. Before everybody gets up, I have shameless plug for the Land Council here. As you know, the Land Council is a nonprofit group. We've just started a new donor-restricted fund called the Water Fund, where you may donate your money and it will go directly to some of the projects that we've discussed here. We've started it this year. We have a founders circle, and we're looking for more founders as we go throughout the summer. Information is on the table as you go out. There's a free raw bar. Please enjoy, and there's a cash bar. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you, David, for your presentation, and thank you for coming.